so glad you could be here today. I'm Elaine Provenzano. I'm the children's librarian. I'm also on the Tuckahoe History Committee and with the Friends of the Ward House. And we love history in Eastchester and Tuckahoe and Bronxville because a lot of history happened here. So we're going to have the program. Connie Kehoe is going to be introducing Mike Grillo momentarily. But after the program, we do have our local history societies here. We have the Eastchester Historical Society and our town historian, Richard Forliana. It's around here. And we have our Tuckahoe historian, Nicholas Cinzano. We have Tuckahoe History Committee there. And we have a Friends of the Ward House table as well. I wanted to remind you to please turn your phones, silence your phones. We are filming this. So we want to make sure that there's no interruptions. So I am going to hand the program over to Connie Kehoe from Revolutionary Westchester 250th, who sponsored this program. We're very grateful for all that they do in our community to get ready for this wonderful event, 2 years. So, Connie Kehoe.
Thank you so much, Elaine, and it's great to see all of you. A lot of friendly faces, Mary Ann, others. So, before I have the pleasure of introducing Mike Grillo and the camp followers, I am going to ask Mary Ann Joyce, who's Deputy Chief of Staff for State Senator Shelley Mayer. And she has a little surprise to announce.
Good afternoon, as Connie said. My name is Mary Ann Joyce, and I'm happy to be here on behalf of State Senator Shelley Mayer, and very much looking forward to the program. And I just want to thank all of you for all the work you do to ensure that important events in history, in particular our local history, are not forgotten, and all the work you do to pass your knowledge on to future generations. And I'm here also very happy on behalf of Senator Mayer to present this commendation to Michael Grillo for all his contributions to this effort.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm quite honored. Thank you very much. This is an honor.
Oh, yes, so well deserved. Thank you. And if you don't know State Senator Mayer, many of you I'm sure do, she has been a leader, I mean, tireless leader in helping with the 250th and overall supporting awareness and the importance of history for us old folks and our young folks too. So Mike Grillo, I want to introduce Mike as my very good friend and also the creator and tailor of my regimental jacket. You can come and look at it. Mike has, how many uniforms have you made?
I would say to date about 26 outfits.
Okay, so an accomplished tailor as well as a historical interpreter for, I'm going to say 30 years?
I would say 30 years now, yeah. I started in '94.
Okay. So all the kids he has talked to, especially at the Van Cortlandt Manor House in the Bronx, where, I don't know, thousands of kids must have come through.
I would say annually about 6,500 to 7,000 students would come throughout the New York City school area. Just before I left there, before COVID hit, we were starting to get students actually from Lower Westchester County as well.
Wow. So ever since I got into this 5 years ago, one of the first people that befriended the project of ours, which is building awareness of the upcoming, as Elaine said, 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. Now, some of you, I am sure, are old enough to remember the bicentennial. You could raise your hand if you remember the bicentennial. Aha! But the young folks have not. So they are going to experience in 2026 something like the memories that you've probably had all your life about that important memory, commemoration of the American Revolution. And we're doing it again. So we're going to need everybody. And a lot of people on board. We've had many donors, we've had many supporters and volunteers, and the Ward House folks, raise your hands back there, Ward House folks, you have to help them. because that is preserving our history. So, with that, I'm going to let us time travel back to another time when the recruiting sergeant will have to tell you about the life of the Continental Army. And I don't know, he might be able to recruit a few. So, thank you. Thank you, Mike. And
you're welcome. Well, thank everyone for coming here this afternoon. So let's give you the time frame. Okay, today's date is the 27th of January. For me, it's the year 1780. And of course, the war's been going on for at least 5 years, if you count Lexington and Concord, before we declare our independence from Great Britain. My name is Sergeant Michael Cricket. But before I get started, I'm going to read a little something off to you. It's a broadside. Broadsides are advertisements. That's how they looked for soldiers during this time period. It's a tradition that goes back to Europe, and especially Great Britain. You go to a tavern, you'll see signs just like this posted, either on the side of the building, on the outside by the door, or inside a common room of the tavern. This one simply says, "Take notice, any gentlemen or others who have a mind to serve in the 1st New York Regiment. If any apprentices have severe masters, any servant too little wages, any children undutiful parents, or any husband too much wife, let them repair to the Commons on the Albany Post Road, and you shall receive a bounty of $3. God save the Congress, and God save General George Washington." This is how I got hooked into joining the Army at the time. Now, at the time, I was living in the village of New Utrecht out in Long Island. I'm a tailor by trade, as you know, because I made Colonel Kehoe's regimental coat over here and many others. And I was doing pretty well. Now, was I born here in the colonies? No. I was actually born in Surrey along the Thames, just like another gentleman I'll talk about a little bit later on who lived here in your village around this time. And when I was about 19, 20 years old, that's when I decided to immigrate to North America. There's a lot of different reasons why people would immigrate here, depending on which colony they went to as well. Some would go to a certain colony for religious liberty. Others would go for opportunities. I went for opportunities. I could say probably a little bit of the religious liberty part too. You got to see, back in Europe, especially Great Britain, you're lucky if not 9 out of 10 people can't own property. It's only 1 out of 10 has a chance within their lifetime to own any property whatsoever. I wanted a better chance. I've heard stories from friends of mine who actually visited North America. I heard these stories about you could actually get land there. 9 out of 10 people own property. So it made sense. I'm going to go to North America. So when I arrived in New York, there was a little war that was going on. And some people say this war was started by a young colonel who was about 20 years old at the time. You all know him as Commander-in-Chief of this Army, Colonel George Washington. A worldwide conflict broke out. And they were recruited in the colonies. You just didn't have local militia units fighting. You have a Westchester County militia here that's been here for a while, but it wasn't just the militias. You also had the regular standing army after 1755 when they landed here in North America. If they needed recruits, they would recruit them here. You just didn't know where they came from because on most of the recruiting roles, they just put down foreigners. Foreigners could have meant anything. You had people of all walks of life from different countries that were in the British Army and other European armies at this time. So throughout that whole entire conflict of what's called the 7 Years' War in my time, and in your world, I believe, they call it the French and Indian War now. That war actually lasted more than 7 years. It lasted about 8 years. And when the war ended, I started to become very successful as a young man living in Utrecht. I was making a good income as a tailor at this time. And of course, 1763 rolls around when we have the proclamation that there's peace between the French. Troubles start. Because Great Britain wants money back for helping to fight against the French. And of course, around 1764, they start all those taxes. We have no representation here, people were crying. Nobody sits in Parliament for us. How dare they try to tax us? So some of those taxes, after a while, they were repealed. And believe it or not, that grand statue that used to stand at Bowling Green Park in the city of New York that was torn down on July 9, 1776 by some rambunctious troops, sorry about that. That statue was built by people subscribing. And why was it built? Because at that time, the king was on our side, so we thought. And that statue didn't last long at all. Because by the time it arrived and by the time it was constructed at a foundry in London, it wasn't put up in that park till 1771. So that statue only stood there for maybe slightly under 5 years. And of course, you all know what they did with that statue. They turned it into 35,000 musket balls. But that's another story. So when this war started to break out, after we found out what happened in Lexington and Concord, I believe some of you call it the shot heard around the world, I started to do a lot of thinking. Now, we didn't find out about what happened in Massachusetts till 3 days later, till the 23rd of April of 1775. And when word got here, a lot of people, especially members of the Sons of Liberty, decided, well, we need to defend ourselves now. Now, the New York City Armory was in the basement of the old City Hall building, which I believe you call Federal Hall today. That was the original site of New York City City Hall. And that was also where the Armory was located. So members of the Sons of Liberty, local militia units went in there, broke into the warehouse, took gunpowder, took the musket balls, and whatever they needed for their own defense, just in case British troops decided to come down from Boston and start attacking us here in New York. And then they started recruiting people here in local militia units. The Westchester County Militia, very famous militia, was being raised here. That was the first regiment I was in before I transferred into the 1st New York Regiment, the regiment that I happen to be in right now. And there was a good friend of mine that I met. And his name was Captain Theodosius Fowler. Captain Theodosius Fowler was recruiting on the village green from the great town of Eastchester, which we're in today. Remember, Eastchester was a lot bigger back then. There's no Tuckahoe just yet. And that village green, by the way, that still exists, a portion of it, but we can talk about that much later when we're done where that village green exists. That's where Mr. Fowler was recruiting. Now, I remember him telling me about how infuriated his father, Judge Jonathan Fowler, was, who was also a colonel in the Westchester County militia in previous years. They didn't speak to each other ever again when he joined the Continental Army in March of 1776. So this war is not only turning into a rebellion against Great Britain for separation, because we're not calling it a revolution yet. They start doing that maybe a century later or so. You have fathers against sons. Remember, we all don't always agree. We don't agree with our brothers sometimes. We don't agree with our fathers or mothers. Sisters don't agree. Same thing's going on with this discussion of independence from Great Britain. So that's just one prime example, the Fowler family. But that's okay. In the end, when it came time for them to pass from this world, they were in the same underground burial vault. They're still together somehow, even though they may never have spoken to each other ever again. Another family from the village that comes to mind also is the Ward family. There's a picture of the house there as well on that banner. Stephen Ward. He's commissary to the Continental Army. He's supplying cattle, food. He's a patriot in our eyes. His brother Edmund thinks otherwise. Edmund Ward is loyal to the British Crown. During the British occupation, he flees to New York City. His poor wife, Phoebe Ward, is left behind. She's writing letters to her Brother-in-law, well, where's my husband? I want to be with him. I'm left here alone to take care of this farm all by myself. But imagine, you're at odds with your neighbors. Maybe your best friend doesn't want to speak to you ever again because you're siding for independence. Maybe your father decides, I have nothing to do with you, I disown you. Maybe your mother's angry at you for the same exact reason. This is what's going on. So who were some of the common people that actually joined the Continental Army at this time? Well, these are just average people. No one special, actually. Yes, we all talk about the glories of General George Washington, but he's just one part of this war. He's the commander-in-chief. Yes, he's the leader. He's the important part, but think about the soldiers. Think about the common souls. Think about people like myself, common tailors, or grocer, a blacksmith, somebody who sits there and shoes horses all day long. These are your common soldiers. And yes, you even had part of the enslaved population join our cause for independence as well. Most famous regiment we all know about is the Rhode Island Regiment, the 1st Rhode Island Regiment. There was also a gentleman on the other side who lived in New Jersey. And he did a lot of small little skirmishes. And his name was Colonel Ty. Colonel Ty was an African American. And he was also a colonel in a loyalist unit. So people of all walks of life. And think about this as a worldwide conflict as well. It's not just the Americans fighting against the British, or the Americans and the French. The Dutch were involved as well, lending us a tremendous amount of money by the time we get into 1780 with the thanks of John Adams, who was ambassador at the time. It was a large interest rate of 7%, but he was able to get that money. Spain was involved in the Spanish colonies. So they would send regiments, militia, from Mexico, from the island of Santo Domingo, which of course today is the Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico. These people were fighting in Spanish West Florida against Great Britain. It's a worldwide conflict. And yes, women were involved too, okay, not so much as soldiers, although we do know some stories, like the most infamous one would probably be Deborah Sampson disguising herself as a young woman to join the Continental Army. You have other women helping out the cause for independence too. You have women like Mary Ludwig Hayes at the Battle of Monmouth. She goes down in history by that name, Molly Pitcher. She's not the first one. The first recorded one, actually, is at the Battle of Fort Washington, November 16, 1776, 2 years earlier. And her name was Margaret Corbin. And they're helping out in all sorts of ways. And I will very shortly, once I am done, because it's important to know about the roles of women, because, of course, we do have a camp follower here, and she's diligently at work at the moment. So when I first joined the Westchester County Militia first, some of the battles I was at. First, the most important, largest battle of the Revolution, you might not realize, was the Battle of Long Island, the Battle of Brooklyn. Right over here is Long Island. Here's the village of Brookland or Brooklyn. Just a tiny little area. There's no Queens at the time. Flushing's part of Long Island. Whitestown is part of Long Island. Newtown, which today is Elmhurst. All of these are little villages. And here's the largest Dutch village in Long Island, the village of New Utrecht. And I remember that day when I heard that the British landed right here, August 27, 1776. And when they landed at Gravesend Bay, they immediately took over the village I lived in, New Utrecht. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to return back home since. And I still haven't returned back to New Utrecht. I probably will end up settling here in the fine village of Eastchester sooner or later, like many other people did. And that was a disaster that day. General Washington lost 3,000 men during the Battle of Long Island. Could you imagine losing 3,000 men out of the 9,000 men that you happen to have there with you? Great Britain has 33,000 troops. Some come from the Principality of Hesse and Kassel, which today you would call Germany. Outnumbered 3-1. Now, Washington had a dilemma then. What am I going to do? Am I going to see the army decimated, possibly be captured by the British, hung as a traitor at the Tower of London, or try to escape? He took the route of escaping. Not because he was a coward, he's trying to save the army. Following morning, the 28th, right over here in the village of Red Hook, he meets up at the Red Lion Inn. He has a discussion with his officers. And one key officer that saved the army 3 times up to the Battle of Trenton came from Massachusetts. Colonel John Glover from Marblehead. He's a sailor. All the men in his regiment, the 14th Continental Regiment up there in Massachusetts, are sailors. And he promises, I'm going to evacuate each and every one of those American soldiers left off of New York, off of Long Island. And he keeps his word. The following day, a huge storm comes into New York Harbor. Now keep in mind, in New York Harbor over here, there's 150 British man of war. 150 warships there. With fog rolled in, so they couldn't see what was going on. Glover was smart enough to muffle the oars by tying rags around them, so instead of, you're not going to hear them squeak when the oarsmen are pulling back. And during that whole entire night, they were able to evacuate all those troops. I was on one of the last boats that left. And that's when General Washington decided himself, well, now it's time for me to go. He waited for every man to get on board. And then for about a week and a half, our job was, as common soldiers, to fortify the city of New York. Now keep in mind, the city of New York is down over here, the lower tip of Manhattan Island, below Canal Street, or as it was called, Chatham Square, named for Earl Pitt. There used to be a statue of him right there. Park still exists by the same exact name. Week and a half we had to fortify the city, because we knew sooner or later, once the British are done with their operations in Long Island, their goal is to take New York City. Now, why do they want New York City? Why do they want the lower Hudson Valley? Simple. They want to control the Hudson River. If they control the Hudson River, they control all communication between the northern colonies, the southern colonies, and most importantly, the supply lines. A week and a half later, 15th of September, the British land, and they take New York City without a fight. Another grouping lands over here in Kips Bay. Now to get an idea where Kips Bay is, think about the FDR Drive in your world. From the streets between 31st Street and 42nd Street, that area was called Kips Bay. There was a large buckwheat farm, probably owned by the Murray family. And I remember standing there as well with some of the other regiments, the other militia units that were with us, and some of the Pennsylvania regiments. A lot of young men were out there. Could you imagine yourselves at the age of 15, 16 years old, standing against one of the strongest army in the world and well-equipped and trained? And you probably were there a week and a half earlier at the Battle of Long Island, seeing your comrades shot, killed, or wounded on the battlefield, or captured. And you're there, you're probably nervous, you're probably scared. A lot of those men turned and ran the second they saw those British troops come ashore at Kips Bay. And they ran up the Albany Post Road. Washington in the background, I remember seeing him on horseback. He's yelling, screaming, waving his sword over his head. And I believe I heard him, these are the men which we're expected to defend our liberty with. He was infuriated seeing these men flee. But I, as a common soldier, I can understand why some of these young men probably ran away. I tried to hold my ground the best I can, but I got caught up in the frenzy of people running away and being pushed aside. That following day, though, on the 16th, those regiments that were running, they all redeemed themselves then. Right over here in the village of Harlem, the Battle of Harlem Heights. There's Highland soldiers, the Highland Brigades, in the service of the British Army meet up with us. We're holding our ground finally. Those young men are no longer scared. And they hold the ground just long enough so Washington can take 6,500 of us up the Albany Post Road, cross Spite and Dival Creek, up to the village of Little Yonkers, up to Upper Yonkers, to the Miles Square Road, and finally to the Old Army Road, trying to make escape all the way up to White Plains. The British are pushing us out of New York, and they're pushing us very hard. I've seen a lot of good friends of mine just disappear, never seen them again. I remember losing my backpack with all my personal belongings after we fled from Kips Bay as well. But at the same time, the Army's being split in half. Washington has half of his troops over here. Remember that gentleman, Colonel John Glover? Here he is again. He's at Split Rock. He's by that old church, the old church of Eastchester, which is called St. Paul's. And he's there looking through his spyglass. And he sees British troops landing under the command of Admiral Richard Howe. He sends about 750 men down to pull them back, just long enough so Washington could get us further north and finally get to his goal, to the city of White Plains, and encamp there to wait to face the enemy just again. The Battle of Pell's Point. Yes, it was a defeat for us, but it was a delaying tactic also to save Washington and the rest of the Army. These are just some of the things I've seen. And I remember up there in White Plains, the end of October 1776, the British or the Hessians are attacking us again. Thank goodness a rainstorm came, because who knows what would have happened to the Army. And then finally, a couple of weeks later, Washington evacuates us across the Hudson River into the Jerseys, making our way across. Now there's one fortification left on Manhattan Island, and that's going to decide if the British are going to come up here also and take over fully. And that was the Battle of Fort Washington. All the way up here, that fort that's there, where that woman, Margaret Corbin, was bringing water to the troops to cool down the cannons between firing. When her husband was killed, she takes over his job manning that cannon. Our very first Molly picture. Once that fort fell, the British controls Manhattan Island. And they still control it as far as I'm concerned, because remember, for me, it's 1780. I have another 3 years to go in this conflict. So one's probably saying, well, why are you doing this? Why are you giving your life fighting? What do you get out of this? Well, I can tell you what I get out of this. I get satisfaction that I'm trying to help create a new country, create freedom, things that people never heard of yet before, except people who are enlightened and read about these things in the universities of Paris. They start reading about it in Edinburgh. That doesn't come for a little while yet. Well, what do you get when you join the Army? What do you get personally? How do you get taken care of? Well, first off, you see a fine suit of clothing that you receive. Now, it wasn't always this way. Now, more and more uniforms are coming into the Army in the year 1780. I would probably have my own civilian clothes. I believe there's a portrait of me going around on a flyer. That's what I was wearing when I first joined the Army. They didn't have money for uniforms. Actually, in 1775, think about it, there was no real United States Army. It wasn't created till June 17th of 1775. And think about the first member of the U.S. Army. On that day when they created it in the Congress in Philadelphia, they only had one person on their rolls. And that was General George Washington, so it was an uphill battle. You want clothing, you want supplies, you want food, you want to raise an army as big as you can. Now, throughout the war, we have anywhere between 35,000, 45,000 troops, probably throughout the whole entire war in rotation. They say there was about 75,000 to 85,000 troops recruited, re-recruited, on rotation. But the British Army has an inexhaustible amount of money, like most European nations did at this time. So, of course, when I joined, I just had that brown suit on. Of course, I was given a firearm, I was given a musket. So let's see, where is my musket? The Brown Bess musket, manufactured in the Tower of London. Of course, it's a British weapon. It's our culture. You speak English. That's what we're familiar with. General Washington's trying to raise an army along the same lines of the British Army. You would like to see everybody wearing the same uniform. Remember, it wasn't always so. Little by little, though, sure, they start creating uniforms, whatever supplies they have. What I'm wearing before you is the iconic uniform that you would expect a Continental soldier to wear. It's a blue coat, red lapels, cuffs and collars, just like Colonel Kehoe's wearing right over here right now. That's the colors that were chosen. Now, originally, General Washington wanted everybody to wear blue and buff. So if you ever seen a portrait of Washington, it looks like that yellowish color that he has for his lapels, cuffs, and collars. And those colors were chosen for a very good reason in 1775. Those colors represent the Whig Party. Not a wig that you wear on your head. Whig Party, W-H-I-G, the progressive party that sits in the Houses of Parliament over in London. They support our cause for liberty. And majority of the Continental Congress, including General Washington, were Whigs. But the problem with trying to create that buff color, it cost a lot of money. So that's why later on, it turns into a red color instead of a buff color. Now there's regiments in New York, sure, the 1st New York Regiment wears what I'm wearing. So does the 2nd New York Regiment. When you get to the 3rd, they're wearing a gray coat. We're green facing. So even within your own state, your own colony, we have different color uniforms. You also have brown uniforms, green uniforms. And up in Connecticut, there's a couple of regiments using old British regimental coats. Guess what color they are? They're red, absolutely. Think about how dangerous that is. Think about friendly fire. That's another reason why they carry flags on the battlefield. And the flags are 6 feet high, 6 feet wide, so you can see them from miles away. So that's why they're that big. So you know if it's friend or foe, provided that regiment, of course, has a regimental flag with them. They don't always usually fly them. It's a very expensive thing to have destroyed on the battlefield and, of course, stolen by the enemy. So right over here I have my Brown Bess musket. So how does this thing work? Well, I'll show you in a moment. Not yet. Grab my cartridge box. This is where I keep my ammunition, by the way. There'd be little paper tubes in here filled up with gunpowder, about this high, filled with gunpowder, a little lead ball tied on the bottom. That is your 18th century bullet. Sometimes the soldiers are responsible for making their own ammunition. Maybe given the supplies, maybe an old book to tear the pages out to make the cartridges. Maybe a pile of old newspapers might be available. A pound of lead per man, 1 bullet mold to share between your messmates. Now your messmates are the person who you cooked your food with, your rations. So 8 men around a fire pit, making their ammunition, and their off time. Off time usually is winter time, winter encampments. Now your cartridge box is always worn, as I was told, right here off the right hip. The musket on the left shoulder. Now you're taught how to stand like a soldier, heels together, toes pointed out. That's one of the first things you're taught as a soldier. Then you're taught, of course, how to march around. Facings, left about face, left about face. Wheeling around, kind of like marching like this. It looks like a door moving on to the battlefield. The longest part of the battle is not fighting, firing your musket. It's maneuvering hundreds and thousands of men on the battlefield. That takes time. You're lucky if the average fighting battle takes place and goes on for maybe an hour to an hour and a half. It's very hard to move hundreds of people on the battlefield. How does this work? Very simple. The first thing you're told, you're standing up perfectly straight. You'd be given a command, prepare to prime and load, prime and load. The musket goes up like this. Some sergeants also would have you hold it down like this, the old way that they did during the French and Indian War. The next command would be open pan. That is called a pan. There's a hole drilled on the side of the barrel. This flint, when it hits the steel, creates a spark of molten steel, hits the gunpowder explodes in the breech, and the musket ball propels back. So when you're priming your cartridge, you take it out of your box, you're holding it up briefly so your sergeant and commander can see you're ready. Tear it open with your teeth. That's why they look to see if you have 4 good teeth on the side of your mouth. Although I've been told that's a myth as well. So you put a few grains of gunpowder in the pan. Next command, shut pans. Following command, charge your cartridge. You cast it about, musket ball and all goes down the barrel. Next command, draw rammers. The ramrod comes halfway out of the pipes. It's flipped over. Ram down cartridge. Return rammers. Now you have a fully loaded weapon. You go back to the shoulder. You're within range, probably 50 yards away from the enemy. Make ready. You pull back on the trigger like this. Present. You point the musket out at the enemy. Fire. You pull the trigger. As you pull the trigger, though, you should turn your head because a flash comes out about this high. If I'm trying to aim, what did I just do to my left eye? I just destroyed my eye. I might be blinded for a while or permanently. To get a better idea how this looks from the side view, I'm going to do it again. Make ready. Present. Fire. Very simple. Simple technology. Of course, if it's raining out, like the rain we've had the last 2-3 days, it's not going to work, of course. So if you happen to have a bayonet during a battle, you can push the enemy away. So how does the bayonet work? Sorry. So the command would be, fix your bayonet. You grab the musket here, here, down to the side. The bayonet comes out with a flourish, and the reason why you're doing that, imagine a sunny day, and you see thousands of blades gleaming in the sun. Now you can understand why all those men ran away from Kips Bay when the British troops came ashore. When they see 500 to 1,000 British troops standing there doing this at the same time, taunting the enemy. The bayonet goes down onto the end of the musket. Goes back to the shoulder. As you're on the march, the command would be, charge your bayonets! Huzzah! Imagine hearing hundreds of men there at Kips Bay, side by side, shoulder to shoulder, one straight line. These bayonets coming towards you at your midsection. Is this a flat blade? It's triangular. It also has what we call blood grooves to make sure you're going to bleed to death. It's hard for a surgeon to sew up those wounds. It's almost impossible unless they cauterize it. They get a piece of metal, they have it in the fire, and they burn that wound closed. These are the common things that soldiers, of course, are taught to do in battle. But remember, during the winter time, there's not much in the way of warfare going on, and this is a European tradition. It's called winter encampment. After the British took New York City in 1776, which ended up being their headquarters till 1783, the base of operations here in North America, they went into winter quarters. This is the time when Washington is out there. He reaches McConkey's Ferry near Trenton. And that battle was the battle we needed for success, because every battle that Washington was up against General Howe, he was losing. Every one. So over there, Christmas Day, 1776, on the banks of the Delaware, it's winter time. Washington's ready to bring his troops into a winter encampment, which would have been Morristown then, after the Battle of Trenton. The Battle of Trenton was actually planned. And it was planned very well. What most people don't realize, you have the myth of the Hessian soldier, they're celebrating Christmas, they're drunk in their barracks. That was far from the truth. What was going on was Colonel Rahl and his troops, the whole entire month of December, were doing hit-and-run tactics up and down the Delaware River, and the Americans were hitting them left and right. The Hessian troops were worn down. They were short on ammunition and supplies. Colonel Royal is writing letters to his commander in New York City, General von Kniphausen, begging for more troops, begging for more supplies, and of course, he's being told, you're fine, you don't need any more. The other thing Washington had, we find out he had a spy. There was a gentleman who spoke German, of German descent, and he was working as a baker for Colonel Royal in Trenton. And Washington knew the morale was low. And that's how we won the Battle of Trenton. And then we go into winter quarters. Winter quarters, you're either sleeping in a tent, and imagine freezing cold weather, it's in the 20s or in the teens, during December, during January, during February. Now most of those tents are about, I would say about this high, maybe about 5 to 5.5 feet wide, and about 7 feet long. 7 to 8 men share one of those tents. Now you're probably wondering, how do you cram so many people in there? Well, in reality, you could probably only fit maybe 5, head to toe, going down the length of the tent. Because think about this, is every soldier sleeping at the same time? Some are on guard duty. Some are out there foraging for food to get supplies for the troops. Some are out there foraging for wood. You need a tremendous amount of firewood during the winter time. That's what's going on in winter encampment. And that's also times like people like me. I'm a tailor by trade, and a tailor by trade, it happens to be on recruiting rolls. Because when you join the Army, this piece of paper is a miniature biography. Who the person is, where they came from. Also, what's on this list is the age of the soldier. Very important information. And what's their trade? What's their job? Because these jobs are being used during the winter time. Think about how you store things at this time. You store things in barrels. You need coopers. If somebody's a cooper, he can fix the barrels. Somebody can fix wheels for wagons. You have somebody who's a gunsmith who knows how to fix muskets as well. All these things are important, and of course, most importantly is the tailor that comes in. Winter time, every second year, supposedly, we were told when we joined the Army, we're going to get a new suit of clothing, a new regimental coat. Well, the supplies don't always come in, and when they do come in, they don't always fit. They're only making uniforms in 2 sizes, small and large. If you're in between, they got to try to shrink it somehow. If you're a little bit bigger, well, I got a complicated job of trying to manipulate fabric and finding other fabric to enlarge and make that suit of clothing fit. This is what's being done in winter encampments. Oh, I suppose you do have to be fed if you're in the Army, correct? We all have to eat. So let's see what we have here in my haversack. I'll get to that in a moment. This is the common soldier's haversack. Mine looks a little bit nicer than others. They don't always have fancy braid around it, but I'm a tailor. I can do what I want with my clothing. I can modify it if I need. This is my rations of food. So let's see what I have in here today. Now, I know you're all used to having things called saran wrap, aluminum foil, Tupperware, maybe you use old discarded containers, butter containers, margarine containers, what have you. We don't have that in the 18th century. I might have some old cloth, but keep in mind, cloth costs money, doesn't it? So most likely this piece of meat that I was given is probably wrapped in an old newspaper, maybe in a leaf. Think about this, it's stored in a barrel with salt. And you don't have a choice of what you get. It's mostly bone, isn't it? It's hard as a rock. So, about a pound of meat maybe? Half pound if you're lucky. Let's see what else is in my haversack. I think I feel some beans. All right. Doesn't matter what type of beans. Like we're always told, you eat what's on the plate. Well, you're definitely going to eat what's on the plate when you're a soldier. So about a pint of beans. And again, these probably just scooped in the bags and not in, probably wouldn't be in sacks like this. That would be the reality. Let's see what else I have. Oh yes, pint of rice. Again, all this stuff would probably be just dumped into the haversack. Probably not nicely packaged the way I have them here today. I might have a wooden bowl. I might not have a wooden bowl. Think about what soldiers are carrying. You're carrying equipment that could weigh up to 65, 75, 100 pounds. You want to be as light as possible. Some of these things also are carried in wagon trains, so you might not see this for a couple of days. So you carry what you could. So I don't have a bowl here. I don't have a plate. There are stories of soldiers just sitting on the dirt ground on the grass. Maybe finding an oversized leaf, possibly, dumping the food after it's cooked in there, eating with their hands. We don't always have a knife or a fork. I might have a wooden spoon. I know how to carve. I have a pocket knife. I can make a spoon out of a piece of wood. If I lose it, it doesn't cost me anything except my labor to make it. So think about the rations of food. And I want you also to think about the stories you hear about Valley Forge, because remember 2 years ago in 1778 for me, I was actually there at Valley Forge and I saw what was going on. There is a shortage of food. I was lucky to get half that amount, which you see before me by my feet. Sometimes I got a third of that amount. And imagine my poor wife here, what she would receive as a camp follower. She's getting a quarter rations. She's not getting much at all. And if we had our child with us, that child's probably maybe getting a fifth. So we're hungry, we're starving. I got to find whatever's there. Think about it, we're in a winter encampment with thousands of soldiers in Valley Forge. The sad thing about Valley Forge is we're surrounded by a farming community. There's stuff here. Washington can't get it because he has no money. The Congress isn't in Philadelphia at that point. The Congress fled all the way out to York, Pennsylvania. They're 200 miles away. They're safe. I've heard stories of Washington writing letters to the Congress. Please send us some supplies. They never came. Send us some money. Oh, don't worry about it. Take what you need. Go to the farmer, tell him we'll pay you back later. You think that farmer's going to be happy? He's going to go straight to civilian house troops because their commissary is going to have what I have in here, gold, silver, copper coinage, which is called species. So if you're a farmer, do you want this or a piece of worthless paper? Think about it. You got a family to take care of. So now we get into that problem of the troops suffering. They're not getting uniforms. They're not getting food. You have to forage for food. Then the worst winter was actually this year in 1780. I thank goodness I am not in Morristown. Morristown's the coldest winter. You start reading accounts of blood and the snow from footprints because shoes are worn out. People are tying rags around their feet. There's a story of one of the officers. He returns with his 4 hunting dogs, and a few days later, 2 of those dogs disappear. We can use your imagination what happened to those dogs. I'm not going to go into details about that. You eat what's there. Squirrel meat. Squirrel's good meat to have. It tastes like bacon. You find a trap of possum, a rabbit, whatever's around. And I also heard stories what's going on in Morristown today about old discarded leather shoes being ripped to pieces and shredded and thrown in a pot so you have some sort of nutrition. Imagine having to eat an old pair of shoes, old leather belts. That's what's going on. So hopefully with all these stories, I can still entice the young ones here to still sign their name on that piece of paper and join the 1st New York Regiment. Oh, by the way, 2 years ago in Valley Forge, remember I told you about Theodosius Fowler? One of our members of the community here in Eastchester? Theodosius Fowler became very good friends with a very young man who was born on the island of St. Nevis, becoming a lawyer. I have a feeling they're going to become business partners. You know who I'm talking about? Who's from the island of St. Nevis? Very famous founding father. He's a lawyer. Ladies, do you know? Who's captain of the New York City Artillery Company in 1776? He got into trouble for firing a cannon into a British warship before the British even attacked. It's probably about that height. Correct, Mr. Hamilton. So there is a connection with Mr. Hamilton for one of the members of your community here. But enough about me. Because remember, there are women here. And remember, as Abigail Adams said to her husband John, remember the ladies. So, madam?
Dear husband, who have you been talking to this whole time?
I've been talking to the people here in the village of Tuckahoe and Eastchester.
We have visitors?
Yes, we do.
Oh, goodness. Please excuse me, I've been at my daily labors. As they say, men work from sun to sun, but women's work is never done. Well, I'm very glad to see that my dear husband has remembered the ladies as much as he can, being a lowly foot soldier. My history with my husband, we met in London. My family originally is from a little capital in northern London, Norwich. And our people there for the past couple of centuries have developed, is this better? They have developed a very lucrative wool trade, so much so that the town over the years have amassed enough money to build an actual church. So there are lots of wool churches where I originally come from. But unfortunately, alas, my dear sainted parents have passed. I'm an only child and therefore an orphan. So I thought, I'll take my skills and I'll try my luck in, of course, London. That's the city to go to at the time. So on the way down, we happened to meet, we happened to talk, trade each other's histories, and I find out that he's quite the intrepid young man. He actually has a plan. Land of your own? That's unheard of. That's absolutely unheard of. In fact, my people have worked on the land in Norwich for many, many generations. We've had lords actually expect us to do labor for them in exchange for land, in exchange for a home. But of course, we do have to pay something. So taxes, livestock. As you can see, very industriously, I'm always working in wool. I know my sheep breeds and I know my business. So hopefully I have a chance perhaps in this new world that he's talking about. But the idea of owning land, you said 9 out of 10 people, is absolutely incredible. That's not something that we are used to over in the old country, but being that I'm alone in the world and I do have a trade, why not? I guess I could try my hand at it. There's no guarantee. I certainly won't get any farther here than I am already, so I might as well try my luck. So we moved to the new country, to North America, and we settled down for a little bit. But then this business that's getting louder and louder and more persistent, war is coming to the colonies. It's very concerning. Of course, men, they have their ideas, and most of the time, we women, we have our own ideas. We don't necessarily let them know, but the ladies do talk. We do have our quilting circles. We do have, entertaining. We do a lot of work on our farms. We do run the farms in their absence, and let me tell you, that's a lot of labor. In addition to raising all of the animals, we have our original money-making kind of animals, our sheep, and we're raising them, at least in our family, for wool. Because I know from my family business, wool brings money, and you did mention you were a tailor.
Yes.
So we could cut out the middleman, produce our own wool, so perhaps we were a little luckier than most. We also, of course, have to fend for ourselves. There are no supermarkets, this thing called I forget, what is it, the net?
Something about spider webbing, something.
Are you sure it's not fishermen or something?
It could be fisherman nets.
I don't know what that is, but in any event, we don't know anything that's ready-made. So if you want something, you really have to either barter, because we do have a bartering system going around at this time. Cash is very hard to come by. But as you can tell, I always have some surplus of lambs, sheep, wool, something. Somebody needs it somewhere. So we can exchange, because hard currency is hard to come by. But somebody has to run that farm and take care of those animals and take care of the plants and buildings. And of course, being that we are a family, we do have children. So I'm always raising children, having children, always busy. And of course, my stock and trade. Here's one of my best, finest lamb sheep fells. These, of course, have to be washed by hand after they're shorn from the sheep. And let me tell you, they're pretty dirty. So they're washed and washed again, dried in the sun. And then, of course, I did tell you women's work is never done. They have to be definitely carded with these tools that I have here, carders. And those align and pull all the fibers in one direction, because when you take them out of the water, though they may be slightly cleaner than when they went in, there's still a lot of handwork and processing to make this. And I'm not even talking about plant fibers. Linen. Some of my neighbors, especially down in the southern colonies where it's much warmer, the linen plant is much more amenable to that. So they'll grow their own plants, flax plants, but you certainly won't see a shirt like this for about a year. There's nothing off the rack, there's nothing from the spider webby thing. So a lot of my friends and I, we work in textiles, and I guess it's a match made in heaven for us, being that he's a tailor. So something like this, my friends would spin that down south. I'm working up in the cooler northern colonies, so I have my sheep. Very happy to have them. They're a good cash crop, but they are labor intensive. So the rumblings of war, from I hear my husband talking to all of his friends, and of course, you know, we wives, we overhear our husband's concerns, and we do get to talk to each other and, you know, kind of, I guess, weigh the pros and cons of what's going on. And I find a lot of people are really kind of undecided, men and women, entire families. But I will say, though, that recently a neighbor of mine, a little bit down the road on the next farm, she suddenly has kind of gotten a little bit cold with the rest of us. Perhaps she doesn't agree with the political thought of the time. Maybe she's going her own way, but then again, keep in mind, we don't have the right to vote at this time, and we really certainly don't have the right to really put our 2 cents in to politics. So it could be that she's just reflecting what her husband has kind of told her to I guess, support. It could be. It could not. We don't know. But I have seen people become a little bit colder to each other, some people a little bit warmer, because they may support our patriotic cause, albeit a little bit under the table, because I've heard tell, and you probably can confirm this, scouts, British spies in the area?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, the roads are definitely not safe.
And then the loyalists have to deal with the Committee of Safeties who are
yes.
seizing their firearms as well. That's been going on for the last, let's see, 4 years now.
Yes, I have heard tell of that. In fact, another neighbor, I would say probably in a state not too far from us, she had told me that somebody in the middle of the night started banging on the front door and awoke the whole entire household. And luckily for her, this time her husband was at home and could deal with it. But I've heard stories where the wife and the children, the farmhands, have been left alone, and it's a very different matter when the man of the house is not there. We are lucky and fortunate to have an older son, so in his father's absence, at least we have him to lean on. But other than that, things can become very precarious very, very quickly. And so eventually that means that I probably will be better served if I follow the drum in the Army, as much as I might not like to, because I'm concerned that my animals will be confiscated, my land will be confiscated, my entire home and farmstead could be burned to the ground and leveled. And it took us so long to do this. But we may not have a choice. It's better for us to come back to nothing and start again rather than not have anything and be gone ourselves. So a lot of families, a lot of women, a lot of older people, children, neighbors, they would band together and join the Army. And that's something that initially General George Washington didn't really approve of, because of course having lots of things to carry, children, dependents, tools, animals, we kind of tended to slow down, you know, the baggage train. So he banished us to the back, which is just fine, because the oxen that are carrying all of the supply wagons are incredibly strong animals, but they're incredibly slow as well. They don't make much progress every day. So, kind of when he's not looking, young children, the elderly, expectant mothers, they can ride up in the wagons, but of course, the minute the general finds out about it, they all disembark again. But he came to learn and notice that even though we might be a little bit slower than the rest, and we might be a little encumbered, we still serve a very, very good purpose, and so he allowed us to stay after some time. If we stay safe, and our husbands, our sons, our fathers, grandfathers, uncles, brothers, if they know that we're there somewhere, at least, and not left by ourselves to fend for who knows what, they tend to stay. Because a lot of times, depending, of course, on the seasons, a lot of them don't re-enlist. A lot of them sometimes abandon the Army completely. Hopefully they don't get caught for desertion, but that's another story. But they tended to stay and fight or re-enlist, or at least stay put, because they knew that we were there somewhere and safe. You might even see us now and again as we're scurrying about carrying out our duties every day. Basically, our children would be trained to help out as well from the moment they could actually stand and walk. So if I had a daughter, and I do have an elderly daughter though, she had been trained to take care of the animals and also help me with the multitude of work that I have every single day. I work as much as I can from sun up to sundown. So summertime, with springtime, it's all hands. In the evenings, it costs us a little bit to burn candles, but we still get work done as much as we can. So I taught my daughter how to shear, how to wash, how to card, how to spin, how to weave, and how to knit. So those are very, very important things that we need to know because, again, if you want clothing, blankets, anything, something like this perhaps, a fine scarf, or a very useful pair of gloves, fingerless gloves, mind you, because I'm still going to be working, of course. Oh, here they are. So anything and everything that you want, that you need, your necessities, and perhaps if you're lucky, a little extra maybe to barter or sell, you have to make it yourself, and you need the skills. Also, too, officers have their own kind of, I guess, kind of their own camaraderie and their own expectations from General Washington. They're expected to be clean-shaven, they're expected to be on time, and always prepared, always immaculately dressed and turned out. I understand the General absolutely abhors filth, does he not?
Yes, he does.
Yes, with good reason too, because things like bed bugs and lice, they're not only are they terrible to see, we're always chasing them at home, and we have the luxuries of being able to wash our clothing or freshen it up, throw some herbs, air it out. A lot of your soldiers don't. So they need to try and keep themselves as clean as possible, and officers are even worse because they have beautiful linen white shirts that need to be kept white. They need to be laundered constantly. So, being the industrious person that I am, I'm also able to do laundry. I'm also able to make my own soap and candles. I would have to supply my household with that as well. So, many women, such as me, CAM followers, we were a very important part of General Washington's campaign. I've served in the capacity of being a water molly on a battlefield, which is pretty treacherous, because the battlefield in Monmouth specifically is full of craters and holes, so very, very easy to trip and twist an ankle in the middle of no man's land, trying to supply water for the gun crews, and for heat-exhausted soldiers, horses that have gone down, so that's pretty harrowing. Another harrowing thing is, women and children are always expanding the family, and women help each other because there are really no physicians to be had. So children are also born in the camps as well. So women actually tend to help each other with encouragement, support as much as possible for expectant laboring mothers. So if you had a trade like maybe a spinner, a weaver, a tailor, or a midwife, those things would be wonderful to have because, of course, life goes on, especially in the camps. So our local midwife might bring her own tools of the trade, a birthing stool, some accoutrements, some things that she's made out of her own garden. We tend to grow a lot of our own food. We also use it for medicines. So there's never really a dull minute in camp, and if there is, very few and far between, we do like to entertain a little bit. I know the General frowns on this, so please don't tell him. Playing cards? It's just to pass the time away, of course. We also have traditional games that are very portable. Farkle, for example. And then, of course, this is probably the one the General really despises.
Oh, he of course
Dice.
Yeah.
I mean, you gotta keep the soldiers happy, and if they can earn a few more bites of food, or maybe some money, or something, maybe a reprieve from guard duty, they're gonna do it. I mean, it's the least of their concerns. It's not going to be like in the beginning, where he literally had to smack heads together, remember?
Yes, he did.
It was terrible.
To be a lenient sergeant, so.
Okay, lucky for us. But yeah, there were, for years, we followed the drum, and sometimes we did it because we wanted to, because we needed to, sometimes because we had no choice. Sometimes, like our sisters in the British Army, they tossed and they pulled lots, and whoever's number or straw was picked, you had to accompany your soldier and your family on campaign whether you wanted to or not, because they expected to, and you would be on the strength or on the rolls for food, but again, as my long-suffering husband has mentioned, Soldiers are not fed very well. Spouses usually share half or so, and children a quarter. So you can see that we were always busy foraging, trying, bartering, anything and everything. But as hard as it was for a really good cause, and if we left it, it would just completely collapse. So we invested way too much in this. We didn't know which way it was really going to go, but at least if we rolled the dice, so to speak, came to the colonies and acquired land, we were going to do that for our own freedom as well.
Thank you, madam. My kind wife. They try to keep the numbers low for camp followers, for obvious reasons. Shortage of supplies, trying to travel, move the army around, village to village, county to county, town to town. Washington was trying to impose maybe 1 or 2 women per company. Now, a company of men could be anywhere between 25 to 50 men. So it goes to reason, keep the numbers low, because of course, where there's the soldiers' wives or refugees, because a lot of the camp followers also were refugees, both male and female. Think about after the battle for New York City falls on the 15th of September, 1776. I'm sure a lot of the population wanted to follow the American army. They wanted to evacuate. So they'll follow the army. They're not going to be kept with the army forever, remember that. Because we can't afford to feed them. We can't afford to supply them. So if you have a skill, that's important. You're a cooper, you're a blacksmith, you're a gunsmith, maybe that's your civilian job. They'll keep you there. You have a soldier's wife, of course she'll be there as well. But keep the numbers low, and that was always the whole entire goal throughout the whole entire army. So I hope I covered a lot of important details for you. How army life was like, what was like, of course, to be here. Because where we are right now, this is no man's land. At any given moment, we don't know who controls this area. I hope General Washington's army controls this area right now in 1780. I have no idea, but I'll be very careful when I head back to the encampment. But I want to thank each and every one of you for being here this afternoon to learn about your heritage, to learn about your history. And I try to throw in as much as possible about the local area, these local people that I mentioned, the Fowlers, the Wards. They're buried at St. Paul's Churchyard in Mount Vernon, not too far from here. And there's another gentleman also I'm going to close with. His name was Charles Turnbull. He was 19 years old when he came over. He was born along the Thames in Surrey, England. Moves to Philadelphia when he arrives here, joins Proctor's artillery, makes it to the rank of captain. 2 years later, he's captured by the British. Being as a captain, officers are treated a lot differently. They're not put into the prison hulks. They're not going to be put in the old Rhinelander sugar house, the prison that was being used at the time. They were put on furlough, which means you have freedom of the town wherever we're going to put you, as long as you sign an agreement not to fight against the British, not to spy against them. And this gentleman, Charles Turnbull, actually did that for 3 years till this year, 1780. He's returned back to Proctor's artillery, only now it's the 4th Continental Artillery. He's at the Battle of Yorktown. He sees evacuation of New York, returns back to the village of Flatbush, meets a local woman, has 7 children. Unfortunately, his wife passes away on the birth of their 7th child, meets another woman, Mary Lefford, and moves up here to the village of Eastchester. This interesting gentleman who lived in Flatbush and Bedford, which is Bedford-Stuye in Brooklyn today, he's also buried at St. Paul's Church. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you. I assume there'll be a chance for some of these young folks to enlist. Elaine, if you'd like to come up, I think you said you have some other visitors here.
Yes.
We did have Senator Mayer who was paying great attention, but she left.
Yes, we were so thrilled that Shelley Mayer could be here. And we also have Village Trustee Josh Gaccione here. So thank you so much for being here, Josh. And I am just thrilled to see all of the students that are here today from the schools. And can you raise your hand? Yes, awesome. So I hope that we can get a photo with all the kids, with General George fortunate, and I see them taking notes, which is really thrilling me. Not only are they here for this program, but they're taking notes. And I'm sure that you learned some new things today, right? Wouldn't you say so? And there's so much more to learn. So, now, are they able to come up and
Absolutely.
see any of the things that you have?
Absolutely.
So you can.
I need them to sign their name on
Oh,
the sheet of
great.
paper.
And we want to thank Maria Grillo. We didn't get to mention Maria at the beginning. And Michael Grillo for their amazing performance. Please, the students can come up. We're going to take some pictures. And we also, please visit the historical societies and ask any questions, see some of the history that's in our village. So again, thank you, Connie, and for Westchester 250th, Revolutionary Westchester 250th, for this program. I want to thank everybody at the library. Richard Forliano, I did want to mention that we do have a program at the end of the month. But Richard, I think, why don't we let the kids come up and take a picture first, and then I'll make that announcement, okay? So you can get up and do that, all right? So thank you so much. Okay, the students want to come up, and we'll take a picture, and you can do the signing. And I know you need me to sign your paperwork as well. Thank you, Wade.
You guys have to go pick. Yeah, take a picture.
Let's take a picture. Yes. Oh yes, we have Tuckahoe marble in the back, so kids, before you leave, if you'd like to get an artifact, we do have Tuckahoe marble at the back there, okay? Let's take a picture.